A rain-soaked night in Montana Territory, 1884, draws Jonas Hale, a broken rancher haunted by war's shame, to a fateful poker game. His barren silver dust ranch teeters on collapse, his wife Martha's dreams crushed by loss. In a smoky saloon, he wins Isabel, a fierce 14-year-old with wolf-like eyes, carrying secrets that could burn empires. What unfolds will forge a family from blood and dust, defying a ruthless frontier. Will their fragile hope survive the shadows hunting them? Subscribe now, share where you're listening from, and uncover how one gamble reshapes a ranch and a soul. Stay tuned. The West's heart beats in their fight. Mud clung to Jonas Hale's boots like a curse as he trudged down the rutted street of Virginia City, Montana Territory, summer of 1884. The rain had quit, but the air hung heavy, thick with the scent of wet earth and the faint tang of whiskey drifting from every saloon. Lanterns flickered, casting jagged shadows on the warped boardwalk. Jonas pulled his battered hat low, shielding his eyes from the drizzle's ghost. His broad shoulders, once proud under a Union coat, now sagged beneath 15 years of drought, debt, and a marriage hollowed out by grief. Silver Dust Ranch, his and Martha's dream, was crumbling. Cattle dying, fences sagging, creditors circling like vultures. Tonight, desperation had driven him to Coyote's Den Saloon. The saloon's doors swung open, exhaling a stench of stale liquor, cigar smoke, and broken promises. Inside, the din was relentless. Clinking glasses, slurred curses, the off-key wail of a piano. Jonas stepped across the threshold, his spurs jangling faintly, eyes scanning the haze. Cowboys leaned against the bar, their faces caked with trail dust. Miners, flush with pay, roared over cards. In the corner, gamblers with sharp eyes and sharper tongues circled poker tables like wolves. Jonas's gaze locked on Barrett Cole, a man whose name carried the weight of blood. The ex-bounty hunter turned loan shark sat sprawled at a table, his embroidered vest gleaming absurdly in the grimy light. His snake-like smile hadn't changed since Jonas last saw him years ago, when a bottle and a bad deal nearly ended in knives. "Hale," Barrett called, voice oily as axle grease. "Heard your ranch is drier than a preacher's sermon. Care to try your luck?" Jonas's jaw tightened. His pride screamed to walk away, but the memory of Martha's quiet sighs, the empty cradle in their cold house, rooted him. He was out of options. His savings bled dry, the bank's threats sharper than a barbed fence. "What's the buy-in?" he asked, voice low, rough as gravel. Barrett's grin widened, teeth glinting like a blade. 500 or something. Valuable. Jonas's hand twitched. Ain't got that kind of cash. Barrett leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Lucky for you, I take side wagers." He snapped his fingers, and a shadow stirred. A girl stepped into the lamplight. 14, maybe, thin as a fence post, her dark hair tangled, face bruised but defiant. Her eyes stopped Jonas cold. Gray, sharp, wolf-like, too old for her years. They held no fear, only contempt, as if she'd seen the world's underbelly and spit in its face. "Isabel," Barrett said, casual as if naming a horse, "owes me more than her life's worth. Win the hand, she's yours. Lose, you limp back to that dying ranch with less than you came." Jonas's stomach churned. Gambling for a child was a sin even Deadwood couldn't wash clean, but the weight of Silver Dust's failure pressed harder. Martha's dreams, his own shame as a deserter in the war, they clawed at him. He met Isabel's gaze. She didn't flinch, her stare slicing through him, daring him to see her as more than a pawn. "What's your name, kid?" he asked, voice softer than he meant. "Isabel," she rasped, her tone like flint on steel. Barrett chuckled. "She's got fire. Might make a ranch hand. Or not. Jonas's fists clenched. He didn't trust Barrett. Never had. Never would. But walking away meant losing more than pride. It meant losing the ranch, Martha's hope, the last shred of who he'd once been. "Deal the cards," he said, the words heavy as lead. The table fell silent, the saloon's clamor fading to a hum. 5-card draw, no wilds, no mercy. Chips clacked, eyes darted. Jonas's heart pounded, his calloused fingers steadying as he studied his hand. Decent, not unbeatable. Barrett's smirk oozed confidence, his polished boots tapping under the table. The final draw came. Jonas swapped 2 cards, his pulse a drumbeat. Barrett lay down a straight, his grin triumphant. Jonas exhaled, spreading his cards. A full house. The room murmured. Barrett's smile froze, his eyes darkening like a storm cloud. "Girl's yours," he said, voice dripping venom. Jonas stood, pocketing his scant winnings. "Didn't come for this, but I ain't leaving her with you." Isabel stepped forward, her expression unreadable, those wolf eyes glinting with something. Defiance, maybe survival. "Let's go," Jonas muttered, pushing through the saloon doors into the damp night. The mud sucked at his boots as he led her to the wagon, Barrett's gaze burning into his back. Montana's wild heart beat around them, and Jonas knew this gamble was only the beginning. Montana's wild heart beat around them, and Jonas knew this gamble was only the beginning. The wagon wheels groaned under sodden sacks of grain as Jonas guided the horses away from Virginia City's flickering lights, the night heavy with the scent of rain-soaked sagebrush. Summer of 1884 draped the plains in a restless gloom, the sky a bruised gray that swallowed the stars. Mud sucked at the wheels, each lurch of the wagon a reminder of the fragile thread holding Silver Dust Ranch together. Beside Jonas sat Isabel, her slight frame rigid, wrapped in his oversized canvas duster. Her thin legs dangled above the wagon's splintered floor, her wolf-like eyes fixed on the horizon, unyielding as the black hills looming in the distance. The rain had dwindled to a fine mist, but it clung to Jonas's beard and stung his knuckles as he gripped the reins. The rhythmic clop of hooves and the creak of wood filled the silence, a silence that felt like a standoff. He stole a glance at the girl. Her tangled hair framed a face too sharp for a child, bruised cheekbones catching the faint glow of a distant lantern. Those eyes, gray, cold, calculating, didn't beg for pity or promise trust. They were a challenge, a blade's edge honed by years in alleys and back rooms. Jonas's gut twisted. He'd won her in a poker game, but what the hell had he won? A stray? A burden? Or something sharper, something that could cut them both? "You always this quiet, kid?" he asked, his voice rough as the trail beneath them. Isabel shrugged, her gaze never wavering. "Depends if a man's worth talking to." Her tone was flat, like a blade scraped clean of rust. Jonas huffed, the ghost of a laugh escaping his lips. Fair enough. The wagon lurched over a rut, and he adjusted his grip, the leather reins biting into his palms. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, dotted with scrub brush and the skeletal remains of old fences, their posts leaning like drunks after a brawl. He tried again. "I didn't win you to own you. I won to keep you from being someone's pawn." Isabel's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, more a flicker of disbelief. "People always say that," she said, her voice low, carrying the weight of too many broken promises. Jonas's jaw clenched. He wanted to argue, to tell her he wasn't like the men she'd known, but the memory of his own failures, deserting his regiment, letting comrades die in the war's blood-soaked fields, choked the words. Instead, he let the silence settle, heavy as the mist. The trail wound past a dry creek bed, its banks cracked like old leather. A coyote's howl sliced through the night, sharp and mournful, answered by another in the distance. Isabel's fingers tightened on the edge of the wagon seat, her knuckles pale. "You worked for Barrett," Jonas said, not a question. Her eyes flicked toward him, unreadable. Near him. Never for him. "Same difference?" Jonas pressed. She shook her head, her voice steel beneath silk. "Not to me." He studied her, the way her shoulders stayed square, her chin tilted just enough to defy the world. She was no stranger to survival, that much was clear. "What did you do for him?" he asked, softer now, probing the edges of her story. Isabel's gaze returned to the horizon. Ran messages, watched doors, counted coins, kept quiet. Her words were clipped, each one a stone dropped into still water. Jonas's stomach knotted. Barrett Cole didn't keep kids around for errands. He made examples of them, broke them to prove his power. "You steal from him?" he asked. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. The wagon creaked on, the horse's breath steaming in the damp air. In the distance, the faint outline of Silver Dust Ranch emerged. A weathered house, a sagging barn, a few bony cattle grazing listlessly. It wasn't much, but it was all Jonas and Martha had left. He glanced at Isabel again, her eyes scanning the dark like a hawk's. "You hungry?" he asked. "Ate yesterday," she said, shrugging. "Maybe." Jonas nodded, his throat tight. "Martha'll feed you. She doesn't abide skinny folks under her roof." Isabel's expression flickered. Doubt, maybe, or the barest sliver of hope. But it vanished quickly, replaced by that guarded, wolfish stare. The wagon rolled closer to the ranch, its silhouette stark against the leaden sky. Jonas's hands tightened on the reins. He'd brought home a girl with secrets sharper than spurs, and the weight of that choice settled like dust in his bones. Whatever lay ahead, the road to Silver Dust was no longer just a path home. It was a gauntlet. Whatever lay ahead, the road to Silver Dust was no longer just a path home. It was a gauntlet. The wagon rattled to a stop before the weathered porch of Silver Dust Ranch, its white paint chipped like old bone under the Montana moon, summer of 1884. Jonas Hale climbed down, his boots sinking into the mud, the air thick with the scent of damp hay and distant pine. Isabel followed, her small frame taut, eyes darting like a cornered animal's. The ranch sprawled before them, a tired sprawl of sagging fences, a leaning barn, and a handful of gaunt cattle, their ribs stark in the lantern's glow. It was a place clinging to life, much like Jonas himself. Inside, Martha stood at the kitchen doorway, her blonde hair tucked under a worn bonnet, hands knotted in her apron. Her eyes, sharp with years of disappointment, widened at the sight of Isabel, thin, bruised, defiant, wrapped in Jonas's oversized duster. "Jonas Hale," Martha said, voice low and edged with steel. "What in God's name is this?" Jonas hesitated, his lie ready but bitter on his tongue. "She's help," he said, avoiding her gaze. "Found her in town, needed a place." Martha's lips tightened, her stare cutting through the dim light. She saw the truth in Isabel's wolfish eyes, in the way the girl stood, chin high, like she'd fight the world before bending to it. The house was warm, the air heavy with wood smoke, and the faint bitterness of old coffee. Martha moved to the stove, her motions sharp, as if to bury her shock in routine. "Sit," she told Isabel, gesturing to a chair by the scarred oak table. The girl hovered, her gaze flicking to the door, calculating escape. Jonas leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the silent standoff. Martha set a tin plate of cornbread and a bowl of thin stew before Isabel, who stared at it like it might bite. "Eat," Martha said, softer now. Isabel's fingers twitched, But she took the spoon, her movements deliberate, as if every bite was a test. That night, Jonas lay awake beside Martha, the silence between them heavier than the quilt. "She's a child, Jonas," Martha whispered, her voice cracking. "Not a hired hand. What really happened?" He stared at the ceiling, the poker game's shame burning in his chest. "I couldn't leave her there," he said finally. "Not with him." Martha turned away, her breathing uneven. She'd wanted children, prayed for them through a dozen miscarriages, and now a stranger's child stood in her home, a mirror to her pain. By dawn, Isabel was already at work, hauling water from the well with a quiet efficiency that belied her age. Jonas watched her from the porch, his coffee gone cold. She moved like someone used to surviving, not living. Quick, precise, always watching. But her defiance showed in flashes. The way she flinched when Martha called her name. The way her hand hovered near her pocket, where Jonas suspected a knife hit. That evening, he found her in the barn, crouched by the horses, her fingers clutching a rusty blade, eyes wild. "Ain't nobody locking me up," she hissed, mistaking his shadow for a threat. Jonas raised his hand slowly. "Ain't nobody locking you up, kid." Her grip eased, but those eyes stayed sharp, cutting through him. "You don't trust me," he said. "Not a question." Isabel's jaw tightened. "Don't trust anybody." She slipped the knife back into her boot and stood, brushing hay from her threadbare dress. Jonas saw himself in her, haunted, hardened, running from ghosts. Martha saw it too. The next day, she caught Isabel slipping toward the corral at dusk, a sack slung over her shoulder, ready to bolt. "You run. You'll die out there," Martha said, voice firm but not unkind. Isabel froze, her back stiff. "I've lived worse." Martha stepped closer, her bonnet casting a shadow across the girl's face. "Maybe. But you're here now. Stay long enough to prove me wrong." Isabel's eyes flickered. Doubt, defiance, a spark of something softer. She dropped the sack. The ranch settled into an uneasy rhythm. Isabel worked, mucking stalls, patching fences, but kept her distance, her wolf eyes scanning every horizon. Jonas caught Martha watching her, her face a mix of grief and grudging respect. One night, as a storm rolled in from the hills, Martha handed Isabel a quilt, her fingers lingering. "You're no burden," she said quietly. Isabel's expression didn't soften, but she took the quilt, clutching it like a shield. Jonas, watching from the doorway, felt the weight of his gamble shift. This girl wasn't just a stray. She was a spark, and silver dust, for all its cracks, might just catch fire. This girl wasn't just a stray. She was a spark, and silver dust, for all its cracks, might just catch fire. The Montana dawn broke over Silver Dust Ranch, summer of 1884, painting the hills in a pale, unforgiving light. Jonas Hale stood on the porch, his breath steaming in the chill, eyes scanning the horizon, where the prairie met the jagged teeth of the Rockies. The ranch lay quiet, save for the low moan of cattle and the creak of the barn door swaying in the breeze. Isabel was already up, hauling buckets from the well, her small frame moving with a purpose that belied her 14 years. But the air felt wrong, heavy with a stillness that prickled Jonas's neck like a warning from his soldiering days. He found the first sign by the corral, a fence wire sliced clean, its ends glinting like a snake's fangs in the morning sun. No accident. Too precise. Too deliberate. Jonas crouched, fingers tracing the cut, his gut tightening. He'd seen marks like this before, back when raiders prowled the territory, leaving threats carved into wood or wire. He straightened, scanning the hills, but saw only shadows and dust. That evening, a worse omen appeared, a scrap of cloth, soaked in blood, hung on the gatepost like a butcher's rag. Martha gasped when she saw it, her hands clutching her apron, eyes wide with a fear she hadn't shown since the war's end. "Isabel," Jonas called, his voice low, urgent, as she chopped wood near the barn. She paused, axe in hand, her wolf-like eyes narrowing. "You know anything about this?" He held up the bloody cloth, its stench sharp in the dusk. Isabel's face didn't change, but her fingers tightened on the axe handle, knuckles pale. "Barrett's men," she said, her voice flat as a frozen creek. "They don't ask. They warn." Jonas's blood ran cold. He'd hoped the saloon was the end of it, but Barrett Cole's shadow stretched long, even here. That night, in the kitchen's dim lantern glow, Isabel spilled her truth. Martha sat rigid, her hands folded tight, while Jonas leaned against the wall, his coffee untouched. "I wasn't just a runner for Barrett," Isabel said, her voice steady but low, like a storm brewing far off. She reached into her boot, pulling out a small leather-bound ledger, its edges frayed, pages stained with use. "This is his book. Names, dates, money, judges, sheriffs, railroad men, all bought. My folks died to keep it from him." Her eyes met Jonas's, unyielding. "Barrett wants it back. He'll kill for it." Martha's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sound. Jonas thumbed through the ledger, its cramped script a map of corruption. Names he recognized, men who held Montana's reins. His mind raced. This wasn't just a girl he'd won. It was a fuse to a powder keg. "Why'd you keep it?" he asked, voice rough. Isabel's jaw tightened. "Leverage. If he came for me, I'd trade it for my skin." Martha's eyes darted to the window, where the dark pressed close. "And now he's coming here," she whispered. Jonas nodded, the weight of his gamble sinking deeper. "We need to be ready." He looked at Isabel, her face half-lit, half-shadowed, a child carrying a man's war. "If you're holding anything else back, now's the time." She shook her head, but her silence felt heavy, like a stone unturned. Martha stood, her voice firm despite the tremor. "We'll protect this place. And her." Jonas met her gaze, seeing a fire he hadn't seen in years. If you're moved by stories of folks fighting for a home against the odds, subscribe to keep up with this tale. Share where you're listening from, and let's ride this trail together. The next morning, Jonas checked the Winchester in the barn, its barrel cold but true. He tightened the corral fences, nailed shut the barn's loose boards, and set traps along the creek bed. Isabel watched, silent, then joined him, her small hands deft with wire and wood. "You ever fight?" Jonas asked, tossing her a hammer. "Fought to eat?" she said, driving a nail with a single swing. "Same as this." Her eyes scanned the hills, always watching, always waiting. By dusk, the ranch felt like a fort under siege. Martha kept a shotgun by the stove, her hands steady as she kneaded dough, her fear buried in work. Jonas stood watch on the porch, the ledger's weight in his coat pocket, its secrets a noose tightening around them. The wind carried a faint hoofbeat, distant but growing, and Jonas knew Barrett's dogs were circling. Silver Dust wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was a battlefield, and the girl with wolf eyes was its spark. Silver Dust wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was a battlefield, and the girl with wolf eyes was its spark. The first shot cracked through the Montana dawn, summer of 1884, shattering the stillness like glass. Jonas Hale bolted from his bed, the Winchester already in his hands, its weight a cold comfort. Martha stirred, her eyes wide with dread, but she said nothing as Jonas pulled on his boots. Another shot echoed, closer now, followed by the thunder of hooves tearing across the prairie. "Stay low," he growled, slipping out the bedroom door, the air sharp with the tang of gunpowder carried on the wind. Outside, the horizon bled crimson, casting Silver Dust Ranch in a ghostly half-light. Jonas crouched on the porch, rifle steady, eyes scanning the eastern ridge. Dust rose like smoke, and 7 riders emerged, their silhouettes stark against the dawn. Wide-brimmed hats, rifles slung across saddles. They moved with the lazy menace of men who knew they held the upper hand. At their head rode Barrett Cole, his embroidered vest catching the first rays, his grin a blade's edge. Isabel appeared beside Jonas, barefoot in the cold dirt, clutching an old Henry repeater. Her hands trembled, but her wolf eyes were steady, locked on the riders. "They're here," she said, voice low as a rattlesnake's hiss. Jonas nodded, his heart a drumbeat. "Keep to cover." He glanced at the house, where Martha's shadow moved behind the window, her shotgun gleaming. The riders slowed at the gate, horses snorting, hooves churning mud. Barrett raised a hand, his voice cutting through the morning chill. "Hale, hand over the girl and that book, and you might walk away." Jonas stepped forward, rifle at his side, his voice calm but iron-hard. "You're trespassing, Cole. Ride out, or you won't ride back." Barrett's laugh was a dry rasp, like wind over bones. "Shame. I was hoping for easy." His hand dropped to his holster, and the world erupted. Jonas fired first, the Winchester's crack splitting the air, kicking dirt at Barrett's feet. Isabel's rifle answered, splintering a fence post, sending a horse rearing. The riders scattered, guns blazing, bullets chewing into the porch rail. Jonas dove behind a water trough, wood splintering above his head. Martha's shotgun roared from the window, a blast that dropped one rider, his scream cut short as he hit the dirt. Isabel crouched low, her shots precise, each one a defiance of her shaking hands. A rider charged the barn, torch in hand, flame licking the rag stuffed in a bottle. Jonas's blood ran cold, a Molotov. "Isabel, inside!" he shouted, but her rifle cracked again, catching the rider's arm. The bottle fell, flames sputtering harmlessly in the mud. Barrett cursed, wheeling his horse, his revolver spitting fire. Jonas returned fire, his bullet grazing Barrett's shoulder, drawing a snarl. 2 riders flanked left, aiming for the corral. Jonas sprinted to the wagon, taking cover, and dropped one with a shot to the leg. The man crumpled, clutching his thigh, blood pooling in the dust. The air was thick with smoke and chaos, the ranch a storm of lead and fury. Martha fired again, her shotgun's boom scattering the flanking riders. Isabel, still at the porch rail, took down another, her bullet finding his chest. He fell from his saddle, hitting the ground with a bone-jarring thud. Jonas's mind raced, 3 against 7, a child among them, but they held. Barely. Barrett's voice cut through the din. "Burn it down!" he roared, pointing at the barn. Another rider raised a torch, but Jonas was faster. He stood, Winchester steady, and fired. The rider's hand exploded in a spray of red, the torch dropping. Barrett's eyes locked on Jonas, rage twisting his face. He spurred his horse forward, revolver raised, and Jonas met him in the open yard, the dawn's silver light glinting off their barrels. 2 shots rang out, one grazing Jonas's arm, the other finding Barrett's chest. He swayed, blood blooming on his vest, and fell, his final words a venomous hiss. "Railroad's coming for her, Hale. You're done." The remaining riders fled, their horses' hooves fading into the hills. Silence returned, heavy as iron. The ranch was scarred. Bullet holes pocked the barn, and smoke curled from the porch. Jonas lowered his rifle, his arm burning, his breath ragged. Isabel stood, pale but unyielding, her rifle still in hand. Martha emerged, shotgun lowered, her face etched with a resolve Jonas hadn't seen in years. The cost of their stand lay in the dust, but Silver Dust still stood. For now. The cost of their stand lay in the dust, but silver dust still stood. For now. The Montana sun rose slow and crimson over the battered ranch, summer of 1884, casting long shadows across bullet-pocked barns and splintered fences. Jonas Hale leaned against the porch rail, his arm bandaged, the sting of Barrett's grazing bullet a dull ache. The air was thick with the acrid bite of gunpowder and the faint sweetness of churned earth. Martha moved silently, sweeping debris from the porch, her face set with a quiet ferocity that hadn't surfaced in years. Isabel sat on the wagon, her small frame hunched, the Henry repeater across her lap, her wolf-like eyes scanning the hills as if expecting ghosts to rise. Jonas approached, his boots crunching on gravel, the ledger's weight still heavy in his coat. "You all right, kid?" he asked, voice rough as the dry creek bed nearby. Isabel's gaze flicked to him, her hand still trembling from the fight. "You didn't save me," she said, her voice low, cutting like a blade through leather. "You saved yourself." Jonas froze, her words slicing into the guilt he'd carried since the war, running from battle, leaving men to die. He wanted to argue, but the truth in her eyes stopped him. "Maybe," he said finally, "but I stood this time." Martha joined them, her shotgun propped by the door, her apron streaked with soot. She looked at Isabel, then at Jonas, her eyes searching. "What now?" she asked, voice steady but thin. Jonas pulled the ledger from his pocket, its frayed edges worn from Isabel's boot. "We take this to the sheriff in Virginia City. Let the law handle it." Isabel's head snapped up, her expression fierce. "You trust them? Every name in that book, sheriffs, judges, railroad men, they're all bought." She slid off the wagon, snatching the ledger from his hand. "You give this up, you're signing my grave." Jonas's jaw tightened. "Then what, kid? Run? Hide? They'll find you." Isabel's eyes burned, not with fear, but with a fire that made Jonas pause. She marched to the kitchen, the ledger clutched tight, and stopped by the stove. The fire inside crackled, casting her face in flickering gold. Without a word, she opened the ledger, its pages whispering secrets of betrayal, and tossed it into the flames. The paper curled, blackened, and roared as it burned. Martha gasped, stepping forward, but Jonas held up a hand, watching the smoke rise like a ghost set free. "Why?" Martha whispered, her voice breaking. Isabel turned, her chin high, her voice steady as iron. "Justice out here ain't in courtrooms. It's in what we choose to do. I choose to end this." The firelight danced in her eyes, and for the first time, Jonas saw not just a survivor, but a force, unyielding as the Montana plains. The ledger's ashes settled, its secrets gone, but its weight lingered in the silence. That evening, the ranch felt different, as if the battle had cracked open something new. Jonas sat at the kitchen table, cleaning his Winchester, while Martha kneaded dough, her hands slower, thoughtful. Isabel stood by the window, staring into the dusk, her small frame silhouetted against the fading light. "You didn't have to stay," Jonas said, breaking the quiet. "Could have run when the shooting started." Isabel's lips twitched, not a smile, but something close. "Didn't feel like running." Martha set the dough aside, her hands trembling slightly. She crossed the room, stopping before Isabel, and without warning, wrapped her arms around the girl. Isabel stiffened, her wolf eyes wide, but she didn't pull away. Martha's embrace was fierce, a dam breaking after years of loss, miscarriages, dreams, hope. "You're not a pawn," Martha whispered, her voice thick. "Not here." Jonas watched, his throat tight, seeing Martha's pain ease, if only a fraction, in that moment. The days that followed were heavy with rebuilding. Jonas and Isabel repaired the corral, their hammers ringing in rhythm. Martha taught Isabel to patch clothes, her needle steady despite the calluses. The ranch was still poor, still scarred, but something had shifted. Jonas caught Isabel pausing by the cattle, her hand lingering on a calf's flank, her eyes softer, less guarded. One night, as the stars burned bright over the prairie, Jonas found her on the porch, staring at the hills. "What's out there for you, kid?" he asked. Isabel's voice was quiet, certain. "Nothing, now. This is enough." Jonas nodded. The weight of his past, his desertion, his failures, lightening just enough to breathe. Silver Dust was a paradise, but it was theirs, forged in blood and ash, and Isabel was no longer just a girl they'd saved. She was the heart of it, and the fight wasn't over. Silver Dust was a paradise, but it was theirs, forged in blood and ash, and Isabel was no longer just a girl they'd saved. She was the heart of it, and the fight wasn't over. The Montana summer of 1884 stretched long and relentlessly, its heat baking the prairie until the earth cracked like old leather. Silver Dust Ranch bore its scars, bullet holes in the barn, patched fences, a porch rail still splintered from Barrett's raid. Jonas Hale stood by the corral, his calloused hands mending wire, the sweat on his brow mixing with the dust. Isabel worked beside him, her small frame wiry but strong, driving nails with a precision that spoke of weeks spent proving her place. Martha, inside, hummed faintly, a sound Jonas hadn't heard since their early years, before loss hollowed their home. The ranch had settled into a fragile rhythm. Isabel rose before dawn, mucking stalls, hauling water, her wolf-like eyes less guarded, but still sharp, always scanning the horizon. Martha taught her to knead dough, to stitch torn shirts, her hands patient despite the grief etched in her face. Jonas watched the girl transform, not into a child, but into something fiercer, a force tethered to the land. Yet the silence of the hills felt uneasy, like the hush before a storm. Barrett was dead, his ledger ash, but his final warning, railroad men hunting Isabel, hung like smoke over the ranch. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the plains, Jonas found Isabel in the barn, oiling a saddle, her fingers deft despite the blisters. "You're getting good at that," he said, leaning against a post. She didn't look up, had to learn fast. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge, a question unasked. Jonas wiped his hands on his jeans, the weight of her presence heavier than the rifle he'd cleaned that morning. "Why'd you stay, kid? After the fire, the shooting, you could have run." Isabel paused, her hands still, her eyes fixed on the leather. "Thought about it," she admitted, her voice low, like the wind through dry grass. "But running's just another cage." She met his gaze, her wolf eyes glinting with something new. Resolve, not defiance. "This place, it's mine now, not just yours." Jonas's throat tightened. He saw himself in her, the stubborn grit that kept him from breaking when the war's shame tried to bury him. That night, over a supper of beans and cornbread, Martha set her spoon down, her eyes on Isabel. "You're not hired help," she said, voice firm but warm. "You're more than that." Isabel's fork stilled, her expression wary, like a deer scenting danger. Jonas cleared his throat. "We've been talking," he said, glancing at Martha. "We want you to stay. Not as a hand, but as family. Our family." The word hung heavy, untested in the air. Martha reached across the table, her hand resting near Isabel's. "We'd make it official. Adoption." Isabel's eyes widened, her breath catching. For a moment she was no wolf, just a girl, raw and unguarded. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonas leaned forward, his voice rough but steady. "Because you're not just surviving here. You're building something. With us." Martha's fingers brushed Isabel's, and this time, The girl didn't flinch. A tear traced Martha's cheek, not from sorrow, but from a hope she'd thought long dead. The weeks that followed felt like a new season. Isabel took to ranch work with a hunger, learning to rope calves, to ride without falling, her small frame growing leaner, stronger. Jonas taught her to read the land, how to spot a storm in the clouds, how to track strays by hoofprints. Martha showed her letters, tracing words on dog-eared pages by lantern light. One afternoon, as they repaired a fence under a blistering sun, Isabel asked, "You ever regret it? Taking me in?" Jonas paused, hammer in hand, the memory of the saloon's smoky haze flickering in his mind. "Not once," he said. "You're the best bet I ever made." By late summer, the ranch felt alive again. The cattle grazed, their hides less gaunt. The barn stood straighter, its boards nailed tight. Isabel's laughter, rare, sharp, like a bell in the wind, echoed when a calf nudged her hand. Jonas and Martha watched from the porch, their hands entwined, the first time in years. The railroad's shadow loomed, but for now, Silver Dust was a home, not just a ranch. Isabel, no longer a stray, was its heartbeat, her wolf eyes now guarding something worth fighting for. Isabel, no longer a stray, was its heartbeat, her wolf eyes now guarding something worth fighting for. The Montana dawn broke warm and golden over Silver Dust Ranch, late summer of 1884, the plains stretching wide under a sky kissed by sunlight. The air buzzed with the promise of a new season, the grass greener, the cattle stirring with a vigor the drought had long stolen. Jonas Hale stood by the creek, its waters trickling stronger after recent rains, his weathered hands resting on a fence post. The ranch bore its battle scars, patched barns, mended gates, but it stood prouder now, a testament to blood and grit. Isabel, now officially a Hale, moved through the chores with a quiet authority, her small frame no longer just surviving, but thriving. A wagon's rattle broke the morning's calm, its wheels kicking up dust as it rolled down the trail. Jonas squinted, spotting Tom Carver, a grizzled neighbor with a beard like iron filings, at the reins. Beside him sat a boy, maybe 12, hollow-cheeked, clutching a tattered sack. In the back, 2 smaller children huddled, a girl, 8, and a boy, barely 5, clinging to a threadbare blanket. New strays, Jonas thought, his chest tightening with a familiar ache. Isabel approached, her wolf eyes softening as she studied the newcomers, seeing herself in their wary stares. "More lost ones," Jonas muttered, his voice rough, but not unkind. Martha emerged from the house, flour dusting her apron, her face softer than it had been in years. "Lord, they look half-starved," she said, already moving toward the kitchen. Within an hour, the children, James, Ellie, and Billy, were washed, fed, and settled in the bunkhouse. Isabel took charge, showing them the ropes with a patience that belied her youth. She taught James to mend fences, her hands guiding his over the wire, while Ellie trailed her like a shadow, learning to gather eggs. Billy, too young for heavy work, followed with wide eyes, clutching a stick like it was a rifle. The ranch became a sanctuary, its gates swinging wide for the lost. By spring of 1885, more came, orphans from Virginia City, runaways from mining camps, each bearing scars of a brutal frontier. Isabel, now 15, led them, her voice firm but kind, teaching them to ride, to read, to trust. Jonas watched her one morning, roping a calf with a skill that rivaled his own, her laughter sharp and rare, like a hawk's cry. "She's building something," Martha murmured from the porch, her hand resting on Jonas's arm. He nodded, pride swelling beneath his rough exterior. More than a ranch, a future. But the railroad's shadow lingered, Whispers reached Silver Dust, tales of men in suits sniffing around town, asking about a girl with a ledger. Jonas kept his Winchester close, its barrel polished, ready. Isabel never spoke of it, but her eyes scanned the hills at dusk, her knife always tucked in her boot. One evening, as storm clouds rolled in, she stood on the porch, tracing a scar on her wrist, a relic of her days with Barrett. Martha joined her, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You're carrying too much," Martha said softly. Isabel's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. "Someone's gotta." By 1890, Silver Dust was a legend across Montana. Newspapers spun tales of the ranch that turned strays into cowhands, where broken souls found purpose. Sheriff Harlan, once wary, now tipped his hat when he passed. The bunkhouse swelled with children, 10, then 12, each one shaped by Isabel's steady hand. She was no longer the girl from the saloon, but a woman, her wolf eyes now a beacon, fierce and unwavering. Jonas, gray creeping into his beard, taught her the ranch's books, the land's secrets. Martha, her hands worn but warm, read to the youngest by lamplight, her voice a balm. One autumn night, under a sky thick with stars, Jonas found Isabel by the creek, watching the water catch the moonlight. "You ever think of leaving?" he asked, his voice low, the weight of years in his words. She shook her head, her braids swaying. "This is home. These kids, they're mine to keep safe." Jonas's chest tightened, the guilt of his past fading against her resolve. Silver Dust wasn't just land, it was a promise, forged by a girl who'd turned ash into hope. The railroad might come, but Isabel Hale would stand ready, her roots deep in Montana's soil, her heart a fire no storm could douse. The sun sets on Silver Dust Ranch, where blood, ash, and hope forged a family from the frontier's dust. Jonas, Martha, and Isabel's fight turned a broken land into a sanctuary, proving even the wildest plains can nurture dreams. Your thoughts on their journey mean the world. Share what moved you, what lingered, or where you're listening from. We're grateful for you riding this trail with us, feeling the grit and heart of Montana's story. Stay tuned for more tales of courage and redemption from the untamed West. Until next time, keep your hat close and your heart open. We'll meet again by the fire.